Hey guys, it's Ellen Brock, novel editor. Today I'm going to talk about how to make introspective or thinking-based scenes interesting. So introspective scenes sort of have a reputation for being boring. There's not a lot of action going on in those scenes, so it makes sense that the reader won't find them quite as exciting. But there are a lot of tips and tricks you can use to make those scenes more interesting and more engaging for the reader. So tip number one is to give your character something to react to. If your character is introspecting, it means they're reacting. They're having an emotional response to something. If nothing has happened to cause that emotional reaction, if your character just starts thinking about something out of the blue, that is when the thinking can feel like meandering, like the character's brain is just gushing out random thoughts, and the reader can get kind of bored. So make sure that there's some sort of catalyst, something that caused this sudden thought to happen, that caused the character to start thinking about this subject, because that will make it a lot more engaging to the reader so that the reader sees that connection between what happened and how the character is reacting. So tip number two is to introduce the dilemma right away. If you're writing an introspective scene, then there needs to be some sort of problem, some reason that the character feels like they're in a lose-lose situation. If the character is just feeling bad or they're just unhappy, you don't need an entire scene to convey that. One or two sentences, maybe a paragraph, that's sufficient if all you need to convey is the character is feeling unhappy or is having some kind of emotional reaction. If you need the character to think through a plan, to introspect, to come up with new ideas, or maybe to process something that's happened, there needs to be a dilemma. So the character needs to feel like they're in a lose-lose situation. There's no easy answer, there's no easy solution, and that dilemma needs to be introduced right away. So this second tip is to make it clear what the dilemma is. What's the problem? What is the character dealing with? Why can't that character just make a decision and move on? There has to be a reason why the character doesn't see a simple solution. And that reason could be personal to them. It could be related to a flaw. Their flaw is preventing them from seeing the obvious choice. But there should be a reason that the character isn't just making a decision and moving on. If you're setting a whole scene, then the dilemma is what creates the conflict. In the same way that an obstacle would create conflict in an active scene, the dilemma creates the conflict in these reactive, introspective scenes. Tip number three is to make sure there's a clear conclusion. If your character is just speculating or introspecting about something, but they don't make a plan of action, they don't change how they're planning to move forward, that can make the scene feel kind of pointless or unnecessary. Again, I'm not talking about incidental reactions where maybe your character has one or two sentences or a paragraph of emotional reaction. I'm talking about entire scenes that are focusing on thinking or talking through a problem. You want to create a nice lead in and lead out of your introspective scene. So like I mentioned in tip number one, what leads into the introspective scene is the event that caused the introspection, the event that caused the character to start reacting to the situation. And what comes out of this reactive scene is the plan that's going to affect how the character moves forward, so it will affect the next scene. So when you have this nice transition in and out of the reactive scenes, it's a lot more interesting and it creates a nice strong flow and a chain reaction between events that helps to pull the reader through the story. So even if you follow this advice and you have the event that causes the introspection, you have the dilemma, and then you have the resolution, sometimes these introspective or thinking or talking scenes can get kind of boring still, and there are a few other tips that might help with that. Firstly, you can have a character disagree. So if your character is introspecting out loud, they're planning out loud, they're thinking about how they're going to react, or they're brainstorming, another character could disagree with their plan or disagree with how they feel about it. So there could be an added layer of tension or conflict between two characters as they work out their plan. It can sometimes be helpful to combine reactive scenes with other scenes that might be boring, like transitional scenes or traveling scenes. So maybe if your character is moving between two locations, they can introspect or brainstorm on the way between those locations. So you're combining two potentially boring scenes together. So to help demonstrate the concepts of the reactive scene and how you can make it engaging, I'm going to use an example from the Mozart season. And I'm just going to read some parts of this scene because it's relatively long, but basically this is a story about a 12-year-old violinist, and she is asked to participate in a competition early on in the book, and after the competition is explained to her that she'll have to perform, if she were to win, that she would have to perform in front of a big crowd of people, there's this section. Suddenly, the idea of winning was the worst thing I could imagine. I'd be out there exposed to everybody. I'd rather lose. Or would I? How many people are going to be in the competition? I'm not exactly sure. Fewer than 10, I think. The finalists have come from a field of 85. 85? Are they adults or something? In college, I mean? So it's clear that she's experiencing anxiety about participating in this competition. She's uncomfortable with being in front of a crowd, with competing with older people. So ultimately, she leaves this lesson with her violinist teacher, and she isn't sure that she wants to compete. She's sort of leaning towards not competing. And then there is this section. I was just crossing the Kaplan's lawn when a catastrophe struck me. If I didn't at least try to play the competition, I'd be just one more boring violin student, and Joel Smirnoff would never even think of looking for me in Portland, Oregon. He wouldn't even ever find out I was alive. I turned around and ran back and knocked on the studio door. Mr. Kaplan opened it, and I told him, yes, I want to play the competition. So you can see how this scene follows the tips that I described earlier in the video. The music teacher asked her to compete in this competition, so that's what sparks her to start thinking, do I want to do it? Do I not want to do it? The dilemma is that she wants to compete. She wants the potential attention, but she's also afraid of the attention, so she has this conflict and this tension. And at the end of the scene, she makes a decision that she is going to compete in the competition, which leads into the next scene. I hope this video gave you a little bit more confidence when it comes to writing introspective scenes, and maybe gave you some better ideas of how you can keep the reader engaged in scenes that may otherwise be boring. This video is part of my novel bootcamp series. I will be wrapping up this series next week with 3 final videos on editing and revisions. Happy writing, guys!